Tansei, I'm Kristen Ashkate. Welcome to APTN National News. Thank you for joining us. 2 people have been arrested for drug trafficking at an airport in Northern Ontario after more than $250,000 in drugs was seized. According to the Anishinaabe-Aski Police Service, they were called to the airport in North Spirit Lake First Nation last Sunday morning. Police were notified that 2 suspects had entered the community from Winnipeg and were in possession of suspected crack cocaine and oxycodone. Police arrested and charged 38-year-old Adrienne Fontaine from Winnipeg with possession for the purpose of trafficking. A 25-year-old female from North Spirit Lake First Nation was also arrested with charges pending. Fontaine appeared for his bail hearing on Monday and was remanded into custody with a future court date set. The investigation continues. 60 Scoop survivors gathered in Winnipeg on Wednesday to rally together and push for more resources. It's now been 10 years since a formal apology was made from the Manitoba government for its involvement in the 60 Scoop. With more, here's APTN's TR Wheatley.
An apology on its own is not enough.
Colleen Rajat is among 60 Scoop survivors gathered at a special event dedicated to the issue. On this day 10 years ago, then Premier Greg Selinger stood in the Manitoba legislature.
As Premier, I would like to apologize on behalf of the province of Manitoba for the 60 Scoop.
Now, with the help of the Anish Healing Centre, 60 Scoop survivors have come together to call on the Manitoba government to engage survivors, create programs, develop and implement a survivor-led strategy, and produce a public report about what's been done since the apology.
We need much more mental health supports. We need repatriation programs to bring our brothers and sisters home. It's been estimated that up to 3,000 Manitoba children was sent to the United States. No follow-up was ever done on our children that were placed in these homes. Proper checks and balances were not put in place.
Rajat also says more research and resources are needed to bring those children home. Southern Chiefs Organization Grand Chief Jerry Daniels is amongst those vowing to push today's Manitoba government into action.
We will support your call for a public report, for the action, and for the recognition that the impacts of the Scoop are not simply history. They are a lived reality.
A lived reality many survivors chose to share on this anniversary.
Those words struck hard. I have been living with a lost identity for most of my life. Not knowing who I am, not knowing where I belong, not knowing my culture or language. I struggled a lot growing up, endured physical abuse from my grade 1 teacher.
I suffered physical, mental, and verbal abuse from teachers. I was called Dirty Indian. I had one teacher who made me eat my lunch on the floor because I wasn't good enough to eat it at my desk.
Lorraine Sinclair is one of 11 siblings taken during the 60 Scoop. They never got to meet their mother.
Today, all we have is a GPS course of where our mother was buried and how we had to go about to phone a funeral home, not knowing her birthday. We knew her first and her last name, we thought. We didn't know her middle name. We didn't even know her the day she died. And they asked me, why don't you guys know this? I said, because we're 60 Scoop survivors. We've never met our mother.
Stories that are still coming out all these years later. In an emailed statement, Families Minister Nahani Fontaine acknowledged the pain caused by the 60s. She said her government has dedicated a staff member for 60 Scoop survivors and that she meets regularly with survivors to hear their recommendations. However, no mention as to whether a report on the matter would be forthcoming. TR Wheatley, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford says he is willing to give First Nations what they want for their support in developing mines, but they cannot, quote, keep coming hat in hand all the time to the government for more money. Ford's controversial comments come as he is set to meet with dozens of Ontario chiefs today. CTV News brings us the details and the reaction.
I declare the motion carried. Already, First Nations were at odds with the Ford government over controversial Bill 5. Now, these comments by the Premier are creating even more problems.
This is like handing an opportunity on a silver platter to First Nations that by the way, I have treated like gold. But there's going to be a point that you can't just keep coming hat in hand all the time to the government. You got to be able to take care of yourselves.
Deeply offensive and racist, actually.
NDP Deputy Leader Saul Mamakwa says the remarks show a lack of understanding of treaty rights by the Premier and creates division.
This is not how you build consent. This is not how you build true partnerships. And it is certainly not the way you try to build a strong Ontario. And you cannot say those kind of things when you're, the Premier of Ontario.
Meanwhile, Chiefs of Ontario released a statement saying Doug Ford alleges that First Nations come hat in hand. We don't. That we have to be able to take care of yourselves. We do. They know that our communities face systemic underfunding and institutionalized racism, that our people were stolen. They are still being stolen. It goes on to say First Nations are not against development, but it must be on their terms. But it will not come at the expense of our inherent and treaty rights, our lands, our people. Our message to today's governments is clear. We were here long before you were, and we will be here long after. Tomorrow, as part of outreach on Bill 5, the Premier is welcoming 40 First Nation chiefs to Queen's Park. Some chiefs have expressed outrage and hurt over the bill as it creates special economic zones where some laws can be ignored. The government wants that label for the mineral-rich Ring of Fire, a region it sees as key to Ontario's economic prosperity, while Indigenous leaders feel rights have been trampled on and they should have been consulted ahead of time. Mamakwa says Bill 5 should be repealed.
Obviously, he needs to apologize for those words. With those remarks, none of these projects will happen.
He says Premier Ford needs a different approach and to do a better job of listening to create a better path forward.
Veronica Blackhawk is up next for her three-part series of Face Value. Plus, we have a new preview of this week's new APTN Investigates. Stay with us. Welcome back. For part 3 of their series Face Value, APTN's Veronica Blackhawk has the story of a Métis musician who's been through an uncomfortable process of reclaiming a place in the Indigenous music community amid accusations of not being real.
You see the way they play, say to be a part of change, I think they lie.
Is a musician by the name Iskway. She's a registered citizen of the Manitoba Métis Federation, born and raised in Winnipeg, under the care of her maternal grandfather, who passed down his knowledge of Métis culture.
I witnessed him feel or express pride in his culture and then also shame. I saw both of those sides of him, right? And that sat with me more than anything, because I could see the hurt that he had experienced and the pride that he felt seeing me be proud. It was something that actually was a generational change, right? Because between my grandfather's generation and my mother's generation, there wasn't as much connection for my mom.
We ask Megan where she stands with the Indigenous music community currently.
Definitely in a different place than it was a few years ago. It has changed quite drastically in the last couple of years since I was accused of lying about being Indigenous. The majority of my career was spent within the Indigenous music community specifically. And the friendships that were built that have sustained the test of time are family members.
For Megan, the lines between culture and identity have always been blurry.
Métis people are, known as prior to being a half-breed nation. And I think this is a really important piece, is that the bits of culture that came down that were specifically Métis when you're an urban kid aren't necessarily as obvious.
Music was a way to explore these lines and advocate for others like her grandfather and herself.
Having heard firsthand what he experienced and understanding very early on that my experiences were and were going to continue to be different because I look like his kin, but I'm not the same shade of skin color. I've always been aware of this. And to me, it was important to utilize this in a way that could raise awareness, could give back to community.
Despite criticism she's received, Megan encourages the dialogue.
I'm tired of being uncomfortable about being a part of this conversation from that side. I'm not sitting here as a victim. I'm sitting here as, hey, this happened, but where can we go from here? We have our kinship ties. We have our lineage. We have all of these things that are passed down from generation, and that makes me a part of my community.
Megan wishes to see these discussions held in a safer way moving forward.
We can't be expected to know everything about each other. So why don't we find a way to, learn from a place of welcoming again, instead of, trying to just pluck people out far too easily? How do we mend things, inter-community, right? Because the thing is that I've been learning more and more is I know nothing.
Megan holds a valid Manitoba Métis Federation card, but she still faces backlash as Indigenous fraud claims resurface online. Throughout the ordeal, Megan's learned the importance of accountability when it comes to questions about community claims. She continues to share her story in hopes that others with complex and mixed identity aren't discouraged from building community connections in the future. Veronica Blackhawk, APTN National News.
The plastic crisis is much bigger than just litter. From toxic fumes to microplastics, Indigenous people are raising the alarm about the potential dangers of global plastic pollution. Coming up this week on a special hour-long episode of APTN Investigates, the team takes a microscopic look at the issue to find out exactly how Indigenous rights are being upheld. Here's a preview.
Every minute, 1 million plastic bottles are purchased globally. Bottles that will further poison oceans, ecosystems, and bodies. Microplastics have been found in the placentas of healthy women. Think about that for a minute. We are literally raising a generation that starts its life polluted before taking its first breath.
Because plastics are not biodegradable, they break down into pieces smaller and smaller and smaller, and all of those plastics have chemicals as well. This is a crisis of a very big scale because the longer we wait, the more plastic is produced and the more the world has to deal with.
We are stewards of Turtle Island. Water is life. I don't need to tell you that.
We are rights holders and knowledge holders and critical partners in the fight against plastic pollution.
All we want is health-based changes.
We need to protect our water in order to preserve, that life for future generations.
The microplastics has, basically colonized the entire planet, and it has turned all of us into sacrifice zones.
And you can watch APTN Investigate Sacrifice Zones airing this Saturday night on APTN. Rapper and R&B artist Northside Baby joins us next in studio to talk about his recent tour and an important meeting he had with his chief. We'll be right back in less than 3 minutes. Thanks for staying with us. Over on the East Coast, St. John's 20, Charlottetown 22. 22 in Cartwright, Happy Valley, Goose Bay 20. Gaspé 15 and Sun, Saquonay 26 and Sun. 21 in Toronto and Rain, Peterborough 27. 24 in Elliott Lake, Sudbury 23 and Sun. Sun's out in God's Lake at 14, Thompson 14. 20 in Gimli, Dauphin 22. 21 in Swift Current, North Battleford 21. 17 in La Ronge and Sun, Uranium City 16. Showers in Grand Prairie at 14, Fort McMurray partly cloudy at 20. 27 in Lethbridge, Medicine Hat, 28. 20 in Vancouver, Quesnel, 20 as well. 23 in Fort Nelson, Smithers, 17 in rain. Showers in Mayo at 25, Rock River, 23. Fort Simpson, 23, Norman Wells, 22. Tuktoyaktuk, 9 in Sun, Pawlatuck, partly cloudy and 6. Chesterfield, 4, Whale Cove, 6. And Arctic Bay, 4, Iqaluit, 4 as well. Our next guest is a rapper and R&B inspired musician from the Deneta First Nation in northern Alberta.
I wanna keep you safe and sound. God, tell me everything on your mind.
Northside Baby, also known as Dawson Pastion Bear, has been creating music since he was a teenager, first making beats and music in his home in his basement. Over time, he built up thousands of followers and fans on TikTok and Facebook, and has now done numerous tours in First Nations and cities across the country. And this summer, he is touring across 4 provinces with more dates on the way. Northside Baby also grew up with issues like poverty and substance abuse, and tackles those heavy subjects in his songs. He hopes that through his music, he can inspire other Indigenous youth to follow and chase their dreams. We recently spoke to Northside Baby in our Winnipeg studio. Here's that interview. Northside Baby, thank you so much for being here. You're currently on tour in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario, so you're really busy. How has the tour been so far? And I understand you also made a stop in Kakawishtal First Nation.
Yes, we did that last night, and it was so beautiful, man. You know, like, I want to say big shout out to them, first and foremost. Like, they really are showing exactly the way a community operates when we can all come together and really work together as a community, and to just see how they operate and how respectful they were and just showing love. The kids had an absolutely fun time. The stage was full. Like, there's probably 50 kids on the stage at one point. So it was just a beautiful event. They showed us the valley, they showed us everywhere in the community, just made us feel welcomed, and it was such a beautiful experience. So.
Definitely rolled out the red carpet for you,
they did,
Kakawishtal style, eh?
Yes, yes, absolutely. But the tour has been great thus far. You know, it's this is what we do. You know, every time we get out there and before we hit the stage, you know, me and my brother JR, we always say, like, let's go do what we do. Yeah. You know, so it's been amazing.
No, that's great. Yeah. And I saw a previous post kind of showing your fans that where your humble beginnings began. You started in the basement of your home. Tell us why you started a career in music and where you came up from.
Yeah, so I was in high school. In school in general, like, every day music was my thing. It was I always had headbuds in, or I would be sitting in class, and you know, even times that I probably shouldn't have been, you know, I was just listening and taking in music. So I knew, like, right away that was something that I gravitated towards. I just felt like this connection to it. So I started DJing at the age of 13. And that was my first dive into music, but I started producing my own music at 15. So 2 years later, I was DJing, and I was like, you know what, I want to learn how to, like, make these sounds myself, you know. So I picked up FL Studio, and that's the way I got started at 15, and I've kind of just stuck it. It's just stuck since.
Self-taught?
Yeah, self-taught, YouTube. I really encourage, like, the way I really taught myself was going on YouTube and just, like, listening to my favorite artists and trying to not replicate exactly, but add my own twist to what I was hearing and what I felt gravitated towards again, right? So that was really what stuck together. It made me pursue it even more and more, and being a student of it all, really. But the basement and its humble beginnings, that's where I recorded my first song, you know, probably up to my, like, 15th song, and then moving around, and next thing you know, I'm at studios and recording at friends. So that's kind of just how it started. But I will never forget, I'm a res kid. I come from the basement. Yeah. And I mean that literally, you know, and that's why I think these kids, they relate to me so much so, is because they see a little bit and they sense a little bit of, you know, this is one of our own, and he's really doing what, you know, we only see on the internet, we only see on TV, you know, which is ironic because we're on TV, but you know, we're doing it indigenously, you know, so.
And fast forward to now, you were featured on Snotty Nose Res Kids' Burning Man, the Red Future album. Was that something on your bucket list?
That was a dream come true, and I told those brothers, like, when that happened, when they invited me to the studio. I spent some months in Vancouver, and they invited me to the studio, and dude, I was like, I remember saying to my friends, like, bro, pinch me, because I'm dreaming right now. Like, they want me on a song. So going in there was like, it felt like a lot of pressure at first, but those dudes are so cool, and they're just so easygoing, you know. They're not bossy in any way. They just do your thing, you know. We're gonna do our thing, and we all just came together and made that song. And it was a really special moment because they had showed me their album. They showed me their album early, and now it's a Juno winner. So shout out to Snotty Nose, man. That's congrats to the boys. They brought it home for us, so I'm really proud of that.
You also recently got to sit down with your chief, and your chief shared some life lessons with you. Can you really briefly explain that meeting?
Absolutely. So Wilfred Hukanuza, he's currently the chief of Denadaw First Nation, which is where I'm from. And we had sit down and had breakfast at Denny's in High Level. And we were sitting there by the window, and he really just like told me, he reminded me of a lot of very core, like personal things, because I explained a little bit of the hardships that I've gone through. And he just told me, you know, you have the opportunity for a life of happiness or destruction, but at the end of the day, it is our choice. And that really stuck with me, you know. It resonated heavily with me. And he also gave me a brief history of where our people have come from, and not only where we've come from and some of the struggles that we've faced. You know, it's amazing that we're still here, you know, and we're thriving. And that's a beautiful thing about our generation. He wanted to remind me of that too, is that, you know, the work that we're doing, because, you know, it's music at the end of the day, and we all have normal lives to get back to. But he was just wanted to remind me how important it is for the youth, how important it is for the future, for these kids to feel that excitement like they did in Kakawishtaha last night. And it's very important for the evolution of our people. And he was just such a great person to talk to. He had a lot of wisdom, and I was really, really happy to meet with him.
Right on. Powerful words of wisdom there for you, Northside Baby. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
And we wish you all the best on the rest of your tour this summer.
Thank you so much. Hey, I appreciate you guys. APTN, Northside Baby. Love you guys. Creasin', we in here, man. Yes, sir. Much love.
That's your daytime newscast for this Thursday. Dennis Ward is back for your evening newscast in a few hours, including another story about Indigenous communities protesting Ontario's Bill 5. Please join us then. From all of us at APTN National News, hi miigwech masicho. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you again next day.